This episode is brought to you by What's the Big Idea, an indispensable guide to becoming a kick-ass creative director by yours truly, Jaime Cabrera. Pick it up on Amazon and now available on Audible. If you've always wanted to know what it takes to be a commercial director, you need to check out commercialdirectingfilmschool.com. I'm signed up for the Filmmaker Bundle, which includes the Masterclass, the Online Shadow, and the Case Study Masterclass. It's got 100% five-star reviews, and it also includes a 30-minute call with the master himself, my friend Jordan Brady, who's directed more than 1,300 commercials for top brands. And right now, exclusively for my listeners, use the code BIGIDEA, one word, to get a whopping $100 off either the Masterclass or the Shadow course. Again, the code BIGIDEA, one word, for $100 off. Go to commercialdirectingfilmschool.com and get started today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Confessions of a Creative Director, the original podcast made by a creative director for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, for creatives of all types looking to up their game. This is your podcast, and I am your host, Jaime Cabrera. On this episode, we have my new buddy and musical brother, Donny Dykowsky. Donny is an accomplished musician, composer, songwriter, and founder of The Ski Team, a premier production, custom music, and sonic branding studio out of Jersey City, New Jersey. His work has garnered Leos, pencils, Clios, Webbys, Sundance Premiers, and is on permanent display at the MOMA. And he's here to share some hot tips that creative directors can use when working with a composer or custom music producer. So, without further ado, let's get into it with Donny Dykowsky. Donny Dykowsky, welcome to Confessions of a Creative Director. How are you, buddy?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, Jaime. I'm excited, a little nervous, but I'm thrilled.
What do you got to be nervous about? You're sitting in a kick-ass studio. I can see right now. You've got guitars everywhere and little candy boxes, all your guitar pedals and stuff. And I see a tweed amp back there. What do you got to be nervous about? It looks like you're living the high life over there.
I know.
I want to come to there.
Likewise, I see ukuleles hanging there, strats of some sort. I think that might be a dobro on the lower left, but
yep.
Yeah, no, things are good. I'm thrilled that I get to make noise for a living, and and this is super cool. Like I said before, I have your book right here, which is funny.
Yeah.
Let me put that in the view. It's a
great resource. I love it.
Great resource, this book.
I love it.
It's been a nice summer read and something to kind of fall back on.
I love that. And we're going to get into this and into your whole kind of. I want you to give us sort of an overview of your career and where you've been, and then you're going to get into a really great topic. About I don't know, maybe about 8 months ago, I kind of made a concerted effort to shift the focus of the podcast to be try to really teach the audience tangible things. And this is going to be a great episode because we're going to talk about music, right? Music for TV spots or music for a content piece or really music for anything. How to select it, how to decide whether you're creating something custom or going with something stock, how to, determine what you want to, all kinds of stuff. So this is going to be a great episode. But before we get into all of that, I want to know, how did I miss this career path? Because I'm looking at your career here on LinkedIn. I could have been doing this whole time. I could have been writing songs and music pieces for TV and film and stuff. Man, how did I screw that up and end up in advertising?
It was a bit of a joke I had with my grandmother when I was in college. I went to a music school. I went to Purchase for studio composition, which at the time was a lot of studying jazz and music theory, and Pro Tools had just really changed the game for making it accessible for composers. But we were still writing on paper and trying to practically apply things in different like workshops and studios, and it was great. Like the whole third floor of the campus of our building was just rehearsal rooms, and it was a really cool community. Interestingly enough, at the same time, I was in a touring band. I've been touring and gigging since I was like 15. So it was like the only excuse other than being really sick to miss class, which was great. Yeah. And then unfortunately, I got really sick. I'm a cancer survivor. All of this stuff, I think, adds into the I guess into the method of how I work today. But you know, when I was about 20 years old, I just got really sick. I couldn't breathe. I was being misdiagnosed for a year, and turns out I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was totally mistreated in the most archaic, you know, way through chemotherapies and whatnot. And eventually I needed to have a stem cell transplant. So like every step of my formative years and at that time, like my career was getting hiccuped. So like I had to give up like certain aspects of music but when I came out the other side, I went into music publishing. Yeah. And then, unfortunately, I still had to kind of tread carefully because I wasn't out of the woods yet. But I was basically running from a fire. I started gigging from every open mic I could possibly find, from New York to Philly, Boston, just in a circuit. And then I put a band together, and that band eventually started playing theaters, and we did the Warped Tour in '05.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it was very cool. And that opened the door for me to start working with a production music company in New York called Pulse.
Okay.
So when I finally got there, I was brought on because they wanted to make my next album. They wanted me to make records, and they wanted me to write for artists. And artists would come through there, and I would collaborate with like hip hop artists like Naughty by Nature. And
that's rad.
There were like some like Lindsay Lohan would come through there, and we would have to like write for her. And you know, that kind of tier of artists. But it was definitely like pushing me in different directions. And at the same time, they were like, "Hey, could you write on a commercial?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure." You know, this was going back to what my grandmother and I would joke about, like back in the day when I was touring. It was like, oh yeah, maybe one day I'll just write for commercials. I didn't know how that was going to happen, but here I am in a commercial music studio where they're trying to break into records, and I'm writing on commercials. So the first thing I did, actually stuck the landing, and it was for a Kool-Aid spot. And although I wasn't taking the lion's share of any composer fee at the time because I had a creative partner and I was paying my dues, I still made more money in that one instance, and I flexed all the same creative muscles that I had, you know, been honing my entire life, rather than it was a better return on my investment of time than working in bars for 2 months to make that same amount of money.
Yeah.
So yeah, that just kind of set me on a path where before I knew it, I was a freelance writer, writing for about 30 different music companies. So agencies started seeing my name on contracts, and then agencies started reaching out to me directly. So that was a very new thing for me to experience in like, you know, 2010. Like I'd never... I didn't expect that, but it was almost like, you know, things were happening word of mouth, and I had some really capable stewards on the agency side that were really like helping to guide me to get the right pieces in place to be a vendor. And that's kind of how I carved out a niche in this space as a, you know, supplier of music and sound for brands.
That's awesome. And you know, first of all, thank God you came through that cancer. I assume you're all free and clear, and you probably still have to monitor it, but I assume you're in remission, or I don't even know what the right terminology would be.
Yeah. Thank God I'm out of that fire, but it was, you know, like at the time it gave you a sense of purpose where you could, you know, you're running from that fire. I had to live in a hospital for basically a year at one point, and coming out of that and having the experience of music publishing and just thinking like, hey, I could survive this. I could survive, these shitty gigs, or I could survive,
anything really.
The pressure. I mean, I think your baseline of happiness and just it kind of levels out at a certain point. I guess with perspective and time, things kind of even out. But I had a very deep perspective at a young age that, I wouldn't wish on anybody, but it gave me, a certain drive that I think helped me in this business, because this business can be a little
tough.
The first commercial demos I was writing, and I was working with MIDI, which at the time wasn't nearly as capable as it is now at software synth and whatnot. And I remember producers coming in saying, "Oh, this is the worst shit I've ever heard," and I'm like, "Oh, it's so crushing to my ego." But
You're like, "I've been through worse, man. You can't hurt me."
But it's always a journey, and I think, and I've never stopped making records, and I feel like that's kind of helped with my production style, because there's something very I think, I don't want to get esoteric in here, because because it is at the end of the day, we're talking about helping brands tell stories, so it's not the most serious thing, but the way that I approach it, there's a certain stoicism in the method, where I want things to be to sound a certain way. I want things to feel like records. I want things to have attention to detail, and I don't want to be so cavalier about the process, especially when you're being trusted with something that is so intimate, when you're trying to reach a target audience. And these things are heard by, if they make it to market, millions of people will hear what you're working on.
And what's crazy is in recent years, some of these songs are becoming real, real phenomenons. Like you think about the Burger King jingle that they just did, right? Where people are doing their own versions of it, or what was that 10 years ago with the Subway, $5 foot long. Completely such a weird progression and melody and stuff, and they become cultural phenomenons, and so it's when you think about it, sure, probably the baseline is to create a great sounding track that tells a story, but thinking even past that, going how do I make this some cultural little touchstone, so it's
I think that a lot of that the $5 foot long thing, to me, is kind of an anomaly. I remember it was very minor. I think
so weird.
It was They Might Be Giants that did that version. So there's a certain equity that comes with, okay, let's get these artists to work with our brand because they can resonate with our target audience. And with that, maybe that taps into a new, like you were saying, a cultural, touch point, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's consistency over time that I think really made that thing work. At first you hear it and you're off-putting, but then after a while you're you come to expect it, and then you want to expect it, and because it's so strange.
Yeah. So, and even with the Burger King one, right? The BK have it, just the production and the way that it sounds. It's kind of the vocals kind of like a little throwaway vocal, right? The guy's almost. It sounds like what's his name? There's a comedian that also plays music. It kind of sounds like his vibe, right? But it's crazy. But all right, well let's jump into it, because I'm excited to talk about this. So,
cool.
10 things to consider when working with a composer or a music producer.
Okay.
Number 1, define a budget, which sounds so on the nose, but in anything in our business, it's so important, and yet it hardly ever happens. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So oftentimes, there's a value to what we do, especially when we're creating intellectual property. And I think at the end of the day, if we're doing something custom, a brand wants something to feel ownable. So therein lies the difference between, maybe should we go to one of the big music libraries and license something that might be used on like a diaper commercial for our PSA, which might be a conflict of interest. But that's what you're getting when you're going to those big libraries. Or should we do something a little more custom that fits our brand? And with that takes a little bit of research. So truthfully, I think brands these days are so used to working with libraries that, and music is often the last line item when it comes to production, that they just don't care. We're treated as a utility. So the budgets 10 years ago may have been a little more robust. And now it's like, okay, this is what we have to work with. Can you get the job done? And for the most part, we're going to say, okay, let's figure it out. Let's figure out the best solution for the budget. But without defining the budget, it's going to dictate the resources. Like, am I reaching out to artists? Which is also a thing that I've always tended to do. I've tended to lean on working with, songwriters and producers rather than commercial composers, because there's a different approach to their method, which, going back to what I said before, maybe it has a little more heart. Maybe that doesn't matter at the end of the day, but it matters to me because, I think the best thing I can tell like a songwriter or a guitar player or an artist of any kind is if you have a voice, if you know who that is. I mean, you could pick out, Jimmy Page or Hendrix, you could pick those guys out. I'm sure no problem. You could tell the difference between a Strat and a Les Paul, and that like it all day. You could do that because they have a voice on their instrument. Doesn't have to be perfect. Or for instance, John Lennon and Kurt Cobain. I mean, there's something so visceral about their approach. Yeah. Anyway, I'm saying that my point is that it's nice to have the resources to reach out to specialists in the field and to be able to produce them from a distance, or to be hands-on. I think you all, and I'll get back to this point later, you want to have your hands in the clay. But if those resources aren't there, or if I'm the most capable composer for the gig, then I'll figure it out. Plus, I also have a library of my own. I've been doing this for many years. It all like comes into play. So how best can you service your client? But yes, defining the budget means everything. It will dictate the resources that are available and the timeliness in which you can deliver.
Yeah, and I think people are often in our business, in all facets of our business, right? Clients are hesitant to do that because I don't know what the thinking is that somehow if they don't tell you, you're going to be able to produce something magical for not a lot of money, right? Or it's just like they know, what you have to work with. Just tell the person, because chances are they can be very creative about how to use the funds, right? And maybe it's not a lot of money, but you can still do something very cool, right? But there's always a hesitation. Well, how much is, what's it going to cost? It's like, well, what kind of house do you want to build? I mean, we gotta know something. Hold on for a second. Let me let my dog out. He's driving me crazy. Hold on.
No worries.
That's my co-host, Mac.
I hope that stays in.
Yeah. Should it? Yeah. We'll keep it in so they can see him. And then probably see that I'm wearing shorts, which is probably not that cool, but
to that point, like it also like the budget will define like you're going to say, is this something ownable, or are we going to license, something? Is it all there's wiggle room like everywhere,
right?
Because no jobs. I mean, this analogy's been thrown around, for years, but every gig's kind of like a snowflake in that regard, and we try our best to service our client. And for me, I'm such a big picture guy. Like I'm not thinking about the gig at hand so much. I'm thinking about the relationship and just finding ways to make cool shit with the best people possible.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So define a budget, because that's going to help, and it can be a range, right? Because that's fine. You can give a range. I think I don't want to speak for you, but you need some kind of understanding of what they can spend or are willing to spend, and then you can come back, right? And you can figure it out. All right. So next one, get them involved early, share scripts, boards, and a clear brief. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Again, like I being the last line item is a tough place to be. I've accepted this. I get it. There's so much of the creative that process that happens where, sometimes you're not you're not considered an important role in the creative process, but you really should be, because music, emotionally connects with your audience faster than any other of, hearing things more than any other sense. It's
Absolutely.
quicker. So that's why, sonic branding, I think, is super important, or knowing who your audience is and leaning into their nostalgia, leaning into their listening habits. So there's things like that should be considered early. And also, not unlike working on films, where you receive a script and you can start working on cues right from what's on the paper. Like I'll go back to one of my favorite partnerships was Albert Hitchcock and Bernard Herrmann, where he would give Bernard Herrmann a script and Bernard Herrmann would deliver like a finished score, before, anything was shot. And you were like, that was the relationship, which is unheard of today. But I'm working with a filmmaker presently that gives me the creative latitude to say, okay, well, this is the script, this is the scenes, if you could work some cues here, that will help the editor in their process, that will help my process. So I think it's important to get in early. It helps everyone, and we're all kind of working in the clay together.
Yeah, and I wonder, I'm thinking, everything is getting, in some ways, things are getting so noisy visually. A lot of cool stuff is being created, right? And I don't even want to get into AI, but there's in some ways things are getting so noisy visually that music in some ways is still so pure in a way, and so can cut through, that you'd almost think that people who are really savvy might want to start there, or at least, to your point, be really early, right? Because that can really help cut through, I think, maybe some of the noise, and maybe that's why things like the Burger King thing has been so successful, because without that track, the visuals wouldn't have been anything, right? So it's interesting. I wonder what you think about that. Do you agree that things just visually are just so much?
I think that there's a concept that I've been trying to talk to my kids about, who are 9, and it's kind of lost on them, but the ambient screen concept, where, not even a concept, I mean, you're really just watching two things at the same time. You're scrolling with one hand and you've got a remote in your other, and so there is a lot of visual stimulation happening all the time, all at once. And even if you pay attention to the environment with which you're in, I mean, you could be present in the moment and overwhelmed by the stimuli that you can find uninspired otherwise, because it's not your phone, whether it's nature or if it's just, certain room tones and mechanical noises and whatnot. I mean, there's always stimulation around us, but how you drive that focus, I think, can help tell the story. And nothing really lives in a vacuum, at least not in media. If it does, it leaves something to be desired. And I think that's the emotional quotient that music can provide, is that, you might not be thinking about it until the end of production, but it is something to be considered. And not unlike reverb, which is like the space in which sound lives. Where does your spot live? Where does this campaign live? How can we holistically connect the dots so it feels like it captures the spirit of the brand? There are things that should absolutely be considered, other than like, hey, let's get Doja Cat, and then all of a sudden it's just a fast track to like her audience, and next thing you know, Taco Bell is on the run. Doesn't matter what they do, she's involved. But
and that's, I suppose that's a strategy unto itself, right?
100%.
But yeah,
it's not a wrong strategy.
Not every brand can afford Doja Cat to do that.
100%.
So include them in your creative meets. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's important to be involved, if nothing else, like a fly on the wall, or
I'll say this: I'm gonna give a shout out to a friend of mine, Dave Landa, who has a company called Free Association. They do a lot of user interface, like UX, like design. He's a great mind, and we grew up together, and we collaborated on a project for Waze, which was like a sonic branding initiative. And this kind of opened a door for me to something that I kind of like co-opted into my own like method when working with other people, is just to have these creative sprints like twice a week, often. Like, and even if things are imperfect, just by sharing ideas with the whole creative team, that includes music, the best ideas bubble to the surface. And like, I'm of the mind always the best idea wins. It might not be yours. And like, you can, as a creative director, sometimes you have to make tough decisions, find that idea in the rough and just hone it. But, being in the creative meets with people, I think, and having a voice sometimes lets the best idea come through. And maybe it's a solution involving sound design. Maybe it's a solution where you need some kind of branded sonic signature that lets the brand be identified through screenless interfacing and something I've often go back to is like, you want that Pavlovian response where you hear it and you hear the brand. Like, no matter where you are, you hear that trigger and you know that it's that brand. Or, maybe it is just a Doja Cat situation where you're bringing in an artist. How can we clear that license? Are we running something custom with that artist? I think all things can be considered, and it goes back to the first thing we discussed, which was budget. But being in those creative meets, I think, is it can be quite essential. Unless, of course, the whole gig is just a utility corporate, industrial film where nothing really is precious. But that's another topic, and I don't. I mean,
I'm sure there's somebody that would say, no, that's got to be, every track has to be perfect too. And that kind of brings me to sort of your next point, right? Which is consider the target audience and their music preference, but also, and maybe it's not directly correlated, but thinking, how often are you also thinking about the edit in advance, right? Mm-hmm. So when I've, and I haven't had the luxury of working with custom music per se. I've had some like customization of existing things maybe, but not like a straight up, we're building it from scratch. But getting ahead and thinking about the edit and like, how is the music going to be used, right? Because if this is like a sizzle reel for like a, Red Bull or something, you're probably going to want something very rhythmic and something that the editor can cut a lot to, right?
Yeah.
Conversely, if it's like, the Montana Tourism Board and it's like they have big old scenic, beautiful shots, you probably don't want something that's super pacey or that has a lot of, because they're not going to cut to it, right? So curious how you start thinking about that. And I imagine that's just by seeing a script or storyboards that you start to get a sense like, oh, okay, this thing's going to have to be pacey, or lots of.
Well, I think it's great when you can supply music to an editor that they can cut to. Then that things are going to be tight. Doing it the other way around, which is like more traditional score and even, going into sound design and Foley, it's easier with sound design because, you can play with the nuance of where things go. But having things hit musically, I think, keeps people in the rhythm almost hypnotically to the pace of the spot. And you can play with those rules. It's fun to like, having breaks and pauses, I think are candy for an editor.
Oh yeah.
And being able to fine tune those things, like let's say you need certain rises and drops and whatnot, but as long as it's done musically, I think it keeps you in the moment. And I don't know, there's a certain zen to it, I guess, in the approach, and hopefully with the editor where you can kind of both trust each other and find like, find a rhythm.
Right. Find the rhythm. Right. Because I think that's super key. All right. Sorry, I took us a little bit off track there, but consider the target audience and their music preferences. How are you? I mean, obviously you kind of have a good understanding, but are you going off and like doing the research on who the target audience is and figuring out their music preferences, or are you often already getting that from the brief, or how do you typically do that?
You'd be surprised. Like, you'll be in a creative meet and they won't even bring that up. They'll bring up a musical reference that's maybe 20, 30 years old, which is fine, but maybe that's telling of the era of the creatives that are behind the project. Right. In that they're like, oh, we want it to sound like, and I'm only saying this because if they're
That's
like,
okay.
it needs to feel like Matchbox 20, and you're like, oh, come on, no, but you're not, that's why I think it's important to kind of maybe have a voice in these meetings. But that's true. Like,
it needs to sound like Hoobastank.
Yes, you'll get something obscure, and maybe that means a lot to the creatives behind it. But good call, Hoobastank. Those words haven't echoed in my brain in decades.
First of all, it's just fun to say Hoobastank.
Yeah,
and not to knock on them, but what was so funny is, and this might be a conversation for another time, is I don't know if you watched the show Beef.
Oh yeah, I loved Beef. That was great.
Whoever the music supervisor was a genius, but it was the music was so on the nose to it was so 90s based, and they went straight down the middle, because like sometimes these things try to go for these really cool obscure tracks. They didn't give a shit. They went like straight down Hoobastank. It was like, but there was a certain genius to it, because it said something about the characters in the show in a way.
Totally.
I can't even quite explain it, but they had a Hoobastank song on there, and I was like, what the hell, Hoobastank? And then I was like, this is fucking perfect, this song.
That's great. That's amazing. It's so fun doing music supervision, especially when the director trusts you to kind of, find the music that's obscure but actually perfect. I mean, yeah, so
getting back to, sorry, I keep taking this off, but I love this shit. So we were saying about the music preferences, like you'd be surprised, right? And
fine.
You said,
yes, there are companies out there that can help you, but I mean, I think doing a cultural audit is important, especially when it comes to sonic branding. Like, you really need to do your research and maybe put together some kind of mood board, if that's helpful visually for the creatives, just so you can kind of hone in on what the audience might like. But it's not rocket science to kind of, define your target audience, the region, the economics, the psychographics as to why they might like certain things, and then to reverse engineer music that, that kind of fits that profile. Usually, I mean, just Spotify Hot 100 is probably going to get you where you need to be. But you need to define your audience. I mean, you wouldn't be, I don't think, leaning on orchestral music if you're trying to reach like, teens or
right.
So, but there's
also something to be said about like, nostalgia, right? So to your point, I'm just making this shit up because it's funny to talk about Matchbox 20, but if somebody's really savvy, it could be, no, you're not understanding. The reason why we want that is because likely the person that we're trying to reach, their parents played this song because, they're of this certain age, and we're trying to reach that kid, and that song is really hot, which means that the kid probably, I mean, there's probably some like really, nuanced, because I'm sometimes surprised, like, like why does this commercial have an ELO song? And my son, my younger son, has like fallen in love with certain like ELO songs from commercials, right? And it's like, why did they choose that? Like, it's crazy.
Well, I guess three things there. One, maybe the song is on the nose, which is great.
Right.
Two, music within regards to picture, you're reaching a captive audience, which is the goal for every recording artist out there, every publisher, every label, every recording artist. Basically, I mean, it's in the era where radio is not as relevant as it once was. You want to try to find ears for your music. But to your point before, which I think is great, is there is a nostalgia factor, and it's something very real because music and sound stimulates the visual cortex. So with that, it conjures memories. It brings something to the forefront called it's called a reminiscence bump. But I think it is a very effective tool for reaching an audience. Is exactly what were their formative years like? What were they listening to? Like, when is it appropriate to play, X? For me, ELO, for example, I mean, I wasn't listening to that when it was on radio, but when classic rock, for sure, I was big into classic rock, still am. It kind of put me on a path for, the music I wanted to study. There was a time where if you didn't listen to Led Zeppelin, we couldn't be friends. Like, this was my high school years. So if I were to hear something with Led Zeppelin, I would immediately be brought back to high school, which I think is effective if somebody, one, can clear the music, but two, if they use it, I'm already in. I'm in.
Yeah, you're already in.
Yeah. So it's that magic's not lost on me. But
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, you want to finish your thought?
No, I'm just kind of babbling here. I
don't want to get.
I don't want to get too off topic. Yeah.
No. Totally, it's all right. Go ahead. Go off topic.
No. I'm just like on the topic. I'm just agreeing with you, and I'll shut up now.
All right. Consider what other brands are doing in the space. What works and what doesn't.
Yeah, this is huge too, and I think that a lot of these things on the list apply a lot to sonic branding, which I think is really important. I mean, every brand out there, for the most part, every company has a logo of some kind, a visual logo. Yeah. But having a sonic logo is, I think, even more effective because for everything we discussed before, the emotional quotient that you can tap into and the brand recall that it can bring up. I mean, you can't really own color, but you can own your, sonic identity. And that is something that, how do you distill the essence of a brand in, maybe 3 to 5 seconds? Right. So the question again was, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Look at what other brands are doing in the space, what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. So that's like a hyper-specific way when you're in the sonic branding space to think about what other brands are doing and why is that effective? How are they possibly telling a story so quickly? But yeah, in a broader sense, like when you're thinking about any brand, like holistically, how are they using music and sound? What works, what doesn't? Like, go to any restaurant, go to any hotel.
Yeah, hotels.
Yeah, and you'll, like, if you pay attention, you'll see like they're using a system of cross-modal, like, sensory stimulation where everything should be working in harmony together, from the lighting to the sound, oftentimes like resorts, the smells, which, I mean, they all play a part in stimulating your memory or helping you form new memories, of course, with that experience where everything is overstimulated or just perfectly in tune. One of those things is off, the whole experience is off. I find this, like, my wife thinks I'm so neurotic. She's like, I'm the closest approximation to Larry David that she's ever known. And I think that's fine. But you put me in any restaurant and, like, if it doesn't smell like a restaurant when you walk, it doesn't smell like food, I'm already put off. Like, you should feel like you're at a restaurant. If the lighting is fluorescent or if the music is just not working in concert with everything else, I'm totally put off.
Yeah.
There's exceptions to the rule. I mean, like, there are certain things that lean into the culture of, and it also should be very considered, like the culture in which the space lives in, should be leaned into. But, you don't want to hear, like bachata music at an Italian restaurant. Sometimes that doesn't really fit.
Right.
Yeah, what's funny is I was just thinking that when you were talking about that, it brought to mind my wife and I went, I think it was last year or the year before, to Vegas to meet some friends, and we stayed, at the Virgin Hotel, and
it was a good deal, but I was also like, man, it's a Virgin hotel. It's probably gonna be pretty swanky, right? And in my mind, I immediately thought music. And we walked in, and it was such a letdown because the vibe wasn't what I expected. The music playing in the lobby was not what I expected. The rooms are pretty good, but just the whole vibe, right? You expect like you're going to be in, Virgin Music Land, kind of thing. And it was really a little bit of a letdown. So I agree that music plays a big part of that whole vibe.
Yeah, and well, there's your expectation too. It's like Virgin has a table image that you expect. And I think as far as film goes, for example, I'll use A24. Like A24 has been outputting like the most fantastic film. I mean, just harking back to the independence of the 90s, like when Miramax was unbesmirched and it was like putting out great films like Pulp Fiction, etc.
Yeah.
Like there's a certain trust that A24 now has, and brands, when they earn that trust, I mean, it's sacred. Like Virgin, I've read Branson's, autobiography, and it's fascinating. Like the origin story there, you champion the guy from his like humble origins of like, owning one record store in London, and like even how he comes up with the name and all that. Yeah. So I think that's the goal that I think every brand, and myself included, like, you want your company, going back to what we said earlier, to have a voice, like, and a trusted voice. And if you misuse that trust or abuse that trust, then I think you're put off. I don't know if you get a second chance at going to a Virgin hotel to be after that experience.
Yeah, maybe not. Is it helpful to you when they come to you with with some references or a playlist and saying, we're thinking, it's somewhere in here? Is that helpful, or do you like to start?
No, 100%, 100%. Sometimes, it's great when you can be trusted to help make that playlist, but it gives you parameters. And I strongly believe that parameters, especially in the creative space, bring out the best in all of us. And that's what's great about production in general in the commercial space, is that we have a timeline that we're backing into, or we have a budget that we're backing into. There's always parameters that are helping to define how we can push the boundaries and whatnot. But yes, playlists are essential. I think any kind of references, whether they're like film references or just, certain keywords, buzzwords. But yeah, if you make a Spotify playlist and share it, it definitely puts everything in a wheelhouse. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of, why sound works, why this music is right. But there's always going to be someone at the end of the chain, or maybe it's a CMO or the owner of a company that's going to be like, you know what, I like this. And it's that subjective, intangible that's going to put things over the top. And then you go back to the other thing. At that point, it's just an issue of consistency over time. If something is effective, not as to what the research is dictating, which, I think is super important.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, as a composer and a songwriter and a producer, I would imagine that you would love to just do stuff custom all day long. But in your mind, does it always have to be custom, or can it be a music? Can it be a license? Can it be something you find and then add on to, or what is your thought there?
Like all of those things, I'd say yes. I mean, they all apply. A budget plays a factor in certain things, but no. I mean, sometimes a needle drop is the answer. And how can we clear this license? How can we get you this song for the right price? If we can't afford that song, what are other options that kind of fit our budget? Can we, and the same applies with custom. Like, is it a custom? Do you want something that feels ownable to your brand, or can we, I mean, I really wouldn't go to a big library in my case because I have such a deep catalog, but I would reach out to people that I trust, producers, songwriters, to give my client a curated search that fits, the brief. So I guess it's you have to, every gig is like a snowflake.
Yeah.
Do I want my hands in the clay making something custom? Always. But that might mean that I'm just doing a musical edit. Maybe I'm trying to craft an ending for something that doesn't have one.
Yeah.
Maybe that means I'm playing with the mix in certain ways. Maybe this particular track that they're licensing needs to be mixed, in Atmos, or it needs to be, there. And I know you didn't want to touch on AI, but I've been finding more often in projects I'm working on now that it's been a very useful tool and specifically in finding in building stems for things that from master recordings that never had stems before. So
really,
yeah.
Oh, how do you do that?
There's software out there that can help you.
You got to give me that information.
Yeah.
That is cool. Like I love that use of the technology. And I was just talking about this idea with Margaret Johnson from Goodby Silverstein Partners about how we're looking at the AI technology sometimes in the wrong way, where it's about like, oh, it's going to produce everything and it's going to take my job, as opposed to it's a tool that's going to help make my idea to come to life. And my idea is, I'm just making shit up, but it's like I'm going to strip everything down to John Bonham's drum beat on When the Levee Breaks, and then I'm going to build something on top of it. And that wasn't possible until AI came into the picture and can help you do that kind of stuff, right? So it's more like the tool that's helping me bring the crazy idea in my head to life.
Yeah, like presently I'm working on a couple of projects right now that require stems from master recordings from known artists.
That's rad.
We're proving the concept right now, and this AI software is helping, rather than like, hey, let's talk to the label, let's get access to master tapes, and this would involve, that is a huge undertaking, like getting access to master tapes and trying to stem things out.
I always wondered how those people do it on YouTube, right? So they're probably, some of them maybe do have access, but maybe some of them are using some of this technology.
You know what? This is off topic, but there's a fascinating documentary with Rick Rubin and Paul McCartney on Hulu.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen that?
I saw that. Yeah, it's so good.
Oh man,
I love it. I could watch that kind of shit for days and days. Just I love that when you isolate stuff. What do you think about? I just heard this on another podcast. It was actually Rick Rubin, the Broken Record, and they were talking to Robbie Robertson from the band, who just passed away. But he was a big music supervisor. I mean, he's done music supervisor and composer for a bunch of Martin Scorsese films. And Rick Rubin asked him about a particular thing that he heard on some movie. I can't remember, Scorsese movie. And what he explained was that he, and this, I guess he was a little bit of ahead of his time. He did basically a mashup of this modern classical composer. I think the guy's name was Max Richter or something like that.
Yeah.
And an old track from Dinah Washington called Bitter Earth or something. And he mashed them together and said, I don't know if this is going to work, or we can even get it licensed, or if the artists are going to approve it. And everybody loved it. And it's kind of this really like ethereal kind of music. And then with her vocals on top of it, he spliced it up, and it just became this really haunting piece.
I love it. I mean, look, if you pay attention, we're living in a mashup at all times, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And going back to the ambient screen that we were talking about earlier, I mean, things are concurrently working together or against each other, and there's something beautiful about all of it. So if you're trying to be hyper realistic in any situation, it's okay for that bleed to come into picture and play a part. I think that's always super fun when I've done some explorations where you have to take like master recordings and classical things and throw break beats on them and excuse me, and just kind of reinvent it for a particular audience. It's all fun. I think that's the beauty about art. And although like I find that the creative process can be, I don't want to be too precious, because again, we're talking about helping brands tell stories, but going back to like, there's a certain respect that I have for the process, the creative process. And I don't think that there's any wrong way to do anything. Like there's preferred ways to get to the end result, but Like the Burger King spot you were talking about. I mean, it is imperfect in the best ways.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's so true, and I totally agree with you. Right, I always have this thing about like when people talk about, I want something that's never been done before, and it's like, well, I hate to tell you this, that doesn't exist, and if it does exist, nobody's going to understand it, and it's not going to work. What does work is these mashups that are fresh and new, and that's really what it is, right? That's why, by the way, probably in recent memory, the most used track for pop music, Genius of Love. I mean, how many times is this song going to get used, right? It's in so many songs, and I love that song, by the way.
Yeah.
It's getting used so much, and it's crazy, and it's a mashup. People are making fresh things from it over and over and over and over. So that's what I love, and that's really, I think, what it's about. It's about mashing things up.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that for a second, and I'll say that it's not about being perfect in this art, and I feel like production in what we do, there's an art to it for sure. It's just finding truth. And if you can be honest in your approach, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because I think when you're perfectly quantized and everything is perfectly calibrated, the soul just evaporates from everything. Like it's there's something special about like The Watch and Ben-Hur or something of that nature, where it's or the car driving by in Lord of the Rings, or the squeak in John Bonham's kick pedal that you can like just overtly hear, especially in Since I've Been Loving You, just to go back to Led Zeppelin real quick.
Oh man, that's one of my favorite songs.
Oh, me too.
So good. You're killing me. But I think it's because maybe it's like it maybe what it is that in a certain way it proves to the listener that the person on the other end was a human. Right, and not like there's some, like even the squeak, right? There's something about it's like, wow, he was playing his kick drum and it squeaked, and like, you know what I mean? Like there's some kind of weird connection to them in a way, because it wasn't totally perfect.
Yeah, I feel like we're just such imperfect creatures that it resonates with us, like that. It's almost it makes the art more approachable. Like I was recently at the Picasso Museum in Antibes, and it was like featured a lot of his work from the later years, and there was so much energy jumping off of the canvas, and you could see that nothing was too over thought. It was like a moment in time that was captured, and that energy still resonates on the canvas. And I was so struck by that, because you could see the thickness of the paint and the brush strokes, and it wasn't meticulous. It was like urgent. Yeah. Everything was so urgent, and it was jumping right at you, and I loved it. And that's what resonates for me is that kind of truth. It's like the moment of truth, and is just being honest in time. If I'm not being,
I love that. I'm going to combine these last two, because they kind of work together. But it's give composers a chance to fail, and remember that you're hiring experts, right? You need to trust the process, and failure is part of the process, right? So what do you want to tell people about this particular thing, about being able to fail a little bit?
Yeah, that I think is a really important part of the process. We live in an age now where it's become commonplace for agencies to triple bid creatives, like at the music.
Yep.
Which I
Everything,
find
really, yeah.
I find that it's kind of unnecessary to do that. We're all, especially when it comes to freelancers, because for the most part, there's a pool of, it's a small world, all these music shops, like maybe they have a couple of in-house writers, they're all reaching out to the same freelancers and giving them the same thing. So that's a truth about this business. How you help, get those writers to tell a certain story with music, maybe there's some nuance there. But, and I have to credit my friend Mike Boris for for the exact words there, like on failure, but it's true, because we talk about this at length when we collaborate. Is that when your client trusts you to present things that don't work, I think it moves the ball forward. As long as that's happening, you're not really failing. Even if you're missing the mark, sometimes we're kind of all chipping away at the marble before we find David together. And it's okay to hear things that you don't like. It doesn't mean you have to pivot from this music company and say, okay, we're just going to go with this music library,
exactly.
Which happens all the time. I mean, it happens like as far as the edit. You could be in the edit and they could just say, you know what, our editor found this piece of music that works perfect. And you've been grinding on a project for 2 months, Yeah. It's such is the nature of the beast. But if you have the trust of the creatives that you're working with to present things that work, that don't work, to fine tune things, to get them in a good place, I feel like that is a real healthy relationship. Like when you're a creative director, for example, and your copywriters and your creative teams are presenting you with ideas, and not all of them are going to be hitting the mark, but that's okay. I mean, it's all part of the conversation. It's all part of the process.
And it serves a purpose, right?
Yeah.
Any failure serves a purpose because it tells you, as somebody on the show previously said, it like shows you where the electrified fence is, right? It's like, that was too far. And
totally.
that in itself informs you. So it's not a failure. It's informing. It's just tightening your focus. So, it's like, hey, what about this? Maybe this element of it, but no, that's too much. That's too far this way. That's too far. It's all helpful. So,
100%. And I think that goes to my point of like just trusting the process. Like part of the process is knowing what doesn't work, and if you're working with experts, if you're bringing on the best people for the job, trust them that they know how to execute, and we can, and then let the best idea win.
Yeah.
Even if that's subjective.
Right. It's all subjective at the end of the day. Oh man, well, this has been a great conversation. I feel, and I mean this as a compliment, I feel kind of like I'm drunk. I feel like we're just like in this zone, and we're just like talking music and sharing all these ideas, and it's only 10 o'clock, and I already feel like I'm a little like I've had a couple of tequila sodas, so that's a good thing, my friend.
Yeah.
What
Awesome.
else? I mean, if you had to impart one piece of advice for anybody working in the creative field, something that has guided your careers, that has helped you, what do you think it would be?
Well,
and sorry, I didn't prep you for that one. I just
no. I kind of have this quote locked and loaded like at all times, because it's one of a dear friend of mine. He's a director, Todd Heyman, was on one of my podcasts, Secret Mentor. This is and he, in one of our questions that we prime our actually we don't, we kind of just, it's part of our script.
Yeah, kind of the setup. Yeah.
He left us with a quote once that just really struck me, because it was you can't control the opportunities that come your way, but you can control getting good. And I love that, because this business of ours is so ever changing and nebulous. There's changing of the guard. There's changing of the the what's acceptable as far as like culturally, etc. But the one thing that I can do is I can control getting good. That's why I've never stopped making records and producing records and songwriting and just honing that craft, because it all translates into whether I'm doing custom music or the attention to podcasting or mixed media or sound design or, any kind of aspect of production. Like, you have to always work on your craft, like never stop learning. So I loved that quote. And I know I don't know if I've co-opted it, but I've always just, I'll give him credit. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, giving credit is good. Well, again, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing all this wisdom. Like I said, I'm just like riding a little high here. So thank you for indulging me in talking about music and Led Zeppelin and Burger King and Subway and all this fun stuff. I could do it. I could do it all day. I appreciate you being on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch. On a personal level, we seem to have a lot in common.
100%.
We need to maybe make some music at some point together, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, and like maybe really get drunk off of while sharing ideas.
I love it. I love it. Next time I'm out there, or next time you're here, man, hit me up. I would love to just play some music with you and drink some tequila or whatever you want to do.
No, it sounds great. I always feel like I can talk to you for hours, and I hope that your listeners are getting some takeaways from this, and I wasn't babbling too much.
You know what? This is gonna sound terrible, but I'm like I don't care. I had this was like my conversation. This is what I wanted to talk about, and so I know they will. I know they're gonna get a lot out of it. So, all right, man, Donny, we'll talk to you soon. Take care, buddy.
Thank you, Jaime.
And that's gonna do it for another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director. Thanks to my very special guest, Donny Dykowsky. Wow, I'm still buzzing from that episode. So much fun to talk to a fellow music geek, music lover. It was really amazing. So hopefully you guys stuck around with us for all those fun detours that we took. Definitely a very special episode. So thank you, Donny, for sharing all that great information. If you haven't picked it up, speaking of great information, if you haven't picked it up, pick up my book, What's the Big Idea? An Indispensable Guide to Becoming a Kick-Ass Creative Director. It's almost that time. If you're looking to make a move up to creative director, if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about it, this is a book that you need. It's going to tell you everything you need to do to prepare for the role. If you're already in the role and going, what the hell did I get myself into? This book can be a lifesaver. So check it out. It's available on Amazon or on Audible. And if you're a creative director in need of a little bit of creative director therapy, check out my website, JaimeCabreraCreative.com. Set up a 20-minute consultation call. See if maybe I can help you with a little creative director coaching. All right, folks, that's going to do it. Until next time, peace, love, and creativity. See ya.
I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but could you make the logo bigger? Bigger, make it